The dogs were howling like the wind itself had taken root in their throats. Something wasn't right. He stepped toward the door with a sigh, the kind that belonged to a man who hadn't expected much from the world in years. But when he opened, the world answered back with snow and silence and something else. There, on the porch of his secluded cabin in the wilderness of northern Arizona, lay a shape he couldn't name. The snow lashed his face like ghost whispers from winters past, but his eyes stayed locked on the small, crumpled figure huddled against the step. Not a stray cat. Not a raccoon. Not a fox. No, this was something wilder. Something in between. A flicker of breath rose weakly from its chest, and blood marked one paw like a wound left by the world. Its ears were torn, its eyes half-lidded, and in that one final glance those eyes met his. And something inside him, something he thought had frozen long ago, stirred. The Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Jet, the young border collie, growled beside him, a restless protector unsure of this wild intrusion. Molly, his aged black lab, stood frozen behind him, tail low, ears tucked, uncertain but present. The man knew what this was now. A bobcat. Kitten, wild-born, hurt, dying. He should have shut the door. He should have said it wasn't his problem. But the stillness in that broken little body, the way it had already given up, made him do something he hadn't done in a long time. Care. He grabbed an old towel, wrapped the kitten gently, and carried it inside as if it were something sacred. The cabin, a quiet tomb since his wife passed, now held a heartbeat he didn't understand. Inside, he knelt by the old plastic bin he'd filled with fleece from Molly's bed. The bobcat didn't flinch, didn't move. It simply breathed in short, shallow rasps like life itself was slipping thread by thread. He fumbled through drawers, found an old baby bottle once meant for a life that never came, filled it with lukewarm water, and pressed it to the kitten's cracked lips. At first nothing, then a twitch. A flicker of instinct, a lick, then exhaustion. But it was enough, it was something. He wasn't a vet, he wasn't anyone's savior. He hadn't meant for his silence to be broken. But here, now, that silence had a pulse. A rhythm, a fragile thing wrapped in fleece, and maybe, just maybe, hope. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. Outside, the storm continued to scream, but inside time slowed. It paced endlessly, nails tapping like worry on old wood. Molly lay down by the bin, her eyes following the kitten's every twitch. The man, who hadn't let himself feel in years, sat in his chair and watched. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know why it mattered. But when the kitten's breathing paused, just for a moment, just long enough to freeze the room, he felt it in his bones. The terror, the pleading silence. And when the tiny chest rose again, clawing for breath, he whispered words into the still air. Words he hadn't said since his wife died. Words like prayer. Words like apology, words like please. And then a name, one he didn't plan to speak. Kai. Even the sparrow has found a home, a place near your altar, Lord Almighty. He didn't know why he called him that. Maybe it sounded like wind through tall trees. Maybe it reminded him of something gentle in a world that had become too sharp. Maybe it was because that name came from a part of him that hadn't died. The kitchen had nothing for a bobcat, soup, canned beans, dried rice. But he remembered something. Sugar, salt, water, life. He boiled it, cooled it, tried again. This time, Kai drank, weakly, barely, but with purpose. Outside, Jet barked at something unseen. Inside, the man sat on the floor, the cold beneath him. Forgotten. Hours passed like ghosts, lingering but silent. Molly moved closer, resting her gray muzzle on the edge of the bin, her eyes never leaving the fragile life inside. This wasn't a rescue. This was resurrection. By late afternoon, shadows stretched across the walls like memories too long hidden. The fire had dimmed, but warmth remained. The man stood, joints aching, and laid another towel gently over Kai's still form. He didn't know if the kitten would make it through the night. But he knew one thing with clarity: he wouldn't let him die alone. He stepped outside with Jet. The snow was deeper, the silence heavier. He chopped wood, the axe breaking, into the hush like a drum beat for the wild. He paused, stared back at the cabin, that lonely shell of a home, and something in him trembled. This wasn't the plan. He hadn't meant to let anything back in, not life, not hope, but now, something was in there that mattered. For, I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a future and a hope. That night he didn't sleep in his bed. He dragged a chair into the garage and sat beside Kai's bin like a sentinel in the night. Every hour he checked on him. Every time his breath caught until he saw the kitten's side rise. Sometimes he whispered things he didn't dare say aloud before, regrets, promises. Once, near midnight, Kai opened his eyes, golden, wide, and ancient like the forest itself. They stared at each other, two souls caught between survival and surrender. Then Kai closed his eyes again, but the man, he couldn't close his heart anymore. He told himself not to get attached. But when the kitten gasped, stopped, and gasped again, he knew. He already was. Morning came, white and sharp. The fire barely held against the cold, and frost etched the windows like veins of ice. But the man's thoughts were fixed on one thing. One life. He opened the garage door. Slowly, afraid, but there he was, Kai, still breathing. Stronger now, rhythmic, steady. The man crouched beside him, reached in, lifted him with both hands like holding a fragile truth. Kai didn't resist. He didn't fear. The man pressed the bottle again to his lips, and this time Kai drank. A miracle in motion, quiet, fierce, real, the wilderness. And the solitary place shall be glad, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose. Kai drank. Not just a few hesitant sips, but real, desperate gulps, as though he'd finally decided not to die. It hit the man like the first crack of sunlight after endless winter, loosening something old and buried deep in his chest. For the first time, the kitten wasn't merely surviving, he was choosing to live. Behind the door, jet wind, pacing with a tension the man could feel in the floorboards. The border collie had never been still since Kai arrived. His normally jittery energy had transformed into something older, animal, instinctual, a tension threaded with the knowledge that something was different, wild, fragile, maybe dangerous. But not to Molly. The old black lab remained curled near Kai's bin. Her clouded eyes locked onto the kitten's every breath. She didn't bark, didn't move, just watched like she knew exactly what Kai was, not a threat, not an enemy, but someone wounded and worthy. Blessed are those who show mercy, for they shall receive mercy. Later that day, the man cleared a table in the garage, the same table he hadn't touched since before the world lost its color. He moved Kai's bin closer to the light, placed a space heater nearby, and hung a towel like a curtain to block out the icy drafts. The storm had broken, but cold still lingered, like sorrow in old bones. He opened his laptop, the one covered in dust and silence. The screen lit his face with the glow of questions he didn't know how to ask. How to feed orphan bobcat kitten? Is it legal to keep a wild bobcat? Bobcat Rehabilitation, Flagstaff, Arizona. But he wasn't seeking permission. He was searching for reassurance, a sign that he wasn't failing this tiny life now sleeping beneath fleece. That's when he found it. Wildlife-specific kitten formula, something stronger than sugar water, something real. He clicked buy now like it was a lifeline and paid extra for express shipping. 2 days, 2 whole days. It felt like a lifetime. When every breath mattered, that night Kai stirred for the first time in sleep, not in pain but in dreams. His paws twitched and his ears flicked softly. The man, on instinct, reached in to adjust the towel, and Kai's tiny paw rested against his hand. Not clawed, not flinching, just there, barely touching. And yet, that touch cracked something. Wide open, he hadn't touched anything gentle since the day her hands went cold, since the house went silent. Since grief turned everything into hard surfaces, old tools, frozen firewood, the sharp bite of wind. But now this wild thing, soft, shaking, surviving, was trusting him with breath. The wolf will live with the lamb, and a little child will lead them. He lifted Kai gently into a cardboard box lined with flannel. placed it near the living room stove where warmth lived like an ember of hope. Not too close, just near enough. Molly curled nearby like a shadow with purpose. Jet stayed on the periphery, walking slow circles, his eyes locked on the box with a wild dog's uncertainty. The man, exhausted, sank into his worn chair, bottle in hand, wrapped in a wool blanket that still smelled faintly of the past. Kai made a sound then, not quite a cry, not quite a breath, something in between, something alive, and the man didn't answer with words. He simply leaned forward and tucked the towel tighter around the kitten's ribs, a quiet act that meant everything. This was never meant to be more than one night, one kindness. But in his bones he already knew, one night would never be enough. On the second morning he waited by the window, boots already laced, breath fogging the glass. The snow had deepened, but he didn't care. The Chewy box arrived at the end of the drive, and he was already moving. Through snowdrifts and sharp air, he grabbed the package like it held medicine for a dying child. Inside, 2 containers of life, powdered formula, dense with nutrients. He rushed to the kitchen, read the instructions 3 times, then mixed it with trembling care, heated it gently, held the bottle in his hands until the warmth felt right. Then crouched beside the crate and offered it to Kai. The kitten drank, fully, hungrily, not with desperation, but with strength. His gold glass eyes opened wider now, ancient yet fragile, like the forest remembered in the soul of a newborn. He moved Kai to a soft crate lined with fleece, surrounded it with pillows, made it a nest, safe, warm, chosen. Molly never left. His side, a silent guardian, her old body curled protectively near the crate. She moved only when the man did, her presence as constant as breath. Jet, however, was unsteady, uneasy. When Kai sneezed, Jet barked. When the man lifted the kitten, Jet growled low in his throat. Once, he lunged, not to harm, but enough to trigger instinct. The man stepped between them fast, voice sharp for the first time in years. Back! Jet froze, ears back, tail lowered. The man's heart thundered. He hadn't raised his voice since the funeral. Later that day it happened again. Jet crept too close to the crate. A low snarl rumbled, but this time Molly moved. The old lab stood, stepped in front of the kitten, and locked eyes with Jet, her body calm, her gaze firm. And Jet backed down. No growl. No fight, just silence. And in that silence, the man felt something ancient, the wild learning to understand itself, the pack shifting. Boundaries forming not through dominance, but protection. Even the animals, Lord, look to you for their food in due season. That evening, as firelight painted the walls, Kai tried to stand, clumsy, shaky, his legs quivered like twigs in the wind, but he didn't stop. He pushed up, wobbled, let out a rasping cry. Not of fear, but effort, determination. The man, breath, caught in his chest, watched as Kai reached the edge of the crate. One paw over, then another. He slipped, but the man caught him in both hands before he fell, cradled him, held him, and Kai didn't resist. He didn't flinch. He looked up, eyes wild but steady, ancient, trusting. The man held him there, caught in a moment that belonged to neither man nor beast, but something in between, a place where survival and spirit met. And in that space the man whispered, I've got you, little one. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The wind had returned, curling around the cabin like a searching hand, but inside, the fire blazed hot and defiant. A man sat in silence, the weight of a tiny life pressed against his chest. His arms were wrapped around a crumpled towel, heartbeat meeting heartbeat, as if time had decided to move slower for the two of them. His name was never meant to be spoken, but now the man whispered it with reverence. Kai. The name slid from the man's lips like a prayer he didn't know he still remembered how to say. He didn't know what the kitten needed, but he knew what he had to give. Across the room, Jet, the black-furred shepherd, watched without blinking. Molly, the aging yellow lab, snored softly by the fire. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It pulsed with warmth, with waiting, with wildness too fragile to be caged. The man leaned back in his chair, eyes fluttering closed, murmuring the name again. Kai, a name that meant something ancient, Something broken, mended, something wild that had chosen him. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel. Then came the sound, sharp, urgent, scratching, not the weak, uncertain shuffle of a kitten still clinging to life, but something desperate. Instinctual, the man's eyes snapped open. The towel was empty. The crate bare. The blanket's edge hung off the floor, clawed and pulled. His heart slammed against his ribs. Kai was gone. Jet was already standing. Molly was at the door, whining low and frantic. He threw the door open without thinking, letting the night slash into the cabin like a blade of ice. Snow stretched untouched beneath the pale moonlight, except for one trail. Tiny paw prints, scattered, uncertain, leading away into the woods. The name tore out of his mouth before he could stop it. Kai! He was already moving. Boots, coat, flashlight, breath burning his lungs. Legs pounding through snow. Branches slapped his face. The prints led up a ridge, dragging now, fainter, and then blood. A smear, bright, real, fresh. The man choked on a sob. No, not now. Not after everything. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. He pushed deeper into the trees, every branch a hand reaching, every silence a scream, and then he saw it. A shape, small, curled motionless beneath a fallen pine. He dropped to his knees. Kai, cold as the snow, bleeding from raw paws, barely breathing. The man wrapped him in his coat, holding him as if sheer will could return the warmth. You stupid, stubborn little thing, he whispered, voice shattered. Why would you run? Kai didn't stir. Back in the cabin, the man moved with a fury fueled by fear. Fire stoked to roaring. Towels tossed into the dryer. He cradled Kai close, rocking like a father, remembering the rhythm of lullabies he'd buried after the funeral. Jet stood like a sentinel. Molly curled beside them, nose pressed to the man's boot. Time stretched like thread about to break. 1 hour, then 2, and then movement. A twitch, a breath. Kai stirred. Not yet. The man pressed his forehead to Kai's fragile form, tears soaking into the gauze. The kitten was alive. Not out of the woods, but still here, still his for now. Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself. A place near your altar, O Lord Almighty. The fire was dying again. He fed it more wood, then turned to Kai. He was still sleeping, breathing steadier now. The man cleaned the split pads of his paws, speaking gently as he worked. You've got the whole forest waiting for you, he whispered. But not if you run before you're ready. His hands trembled as he bandaged each foot, wrapping carefully. Then he stirred up a meal, softened meat, formula, warm and familiar. He coaxed a spoon near the kitten's mouth. Come on, he said softly. Don't make me chase you through another blizzard. Kai licked once, then again, then leaned forward. The man smiled through the sting in his throat. You're wild, I know. I'm not keeping you. I just need to help. Jet sat quietly. Nearby now, no longer growling. Molly had moved closer, resting near the crate like a guardian who understood her duty. The room was changing. The energy shifting. The wildness was still there, but so was trust. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Jet crept forward, tail low. Unsure, the man lifted a hand and whispered, Easy? He's not yours, not yet. Stillness filled the room. Not emptiness, something deeper. As if the space was waiting for the next chapter, for something unspoken to be honored. You're going back, the man whispered to Kai. You belong to the wild. I know that. He looked at the small bandaged. Pause, the twitch of ears as Kai listened, even in sleep, but not yet. Jet exhaled. Molly stayed steady. The man tucked the towel tighter around Kai. I'll let you go, he said. I promise. Just let me help you live first. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like a voice half-remembered. Inside, the silence didn't feel so lonely anymore. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. The days pass slowly. Cold mornings, quiet nights, routines that stitch themselves into something more than survival. The man didn't talk much, but when he did, it was to Kai. Always soft, always steady, he changed the bandages. He warmed the food. He rubbed gentle circles down Kai's back. "You're healing," he murmured once. "But don't fall in love with comfort. It's not where you belong." Kai didn't flinch anymore. He leaned into touch. He trusted. Jet stopped pacing. Sometimes he sat right beside the man during feedings. Molly remained the heart of the house, silent, steady, protective. But she knew, they all knew, it wasn't forever, and that knowing made it all the more sacred. For everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. And then 3 knocks. Not loud, not frantic. Just 3 sharp raps on the old pine door. The man froze. Jet barked once and charged forward. Molly rose slowly. No one came this far. Not in winter. Not since the funeral. The man opened the door, breath catching. A stranger stood on the porch. Camo jacket, gloves half chewed. Truck idling down the trail. "Evening," the man said. "Name's Dean. I'm the new ranger working this section of the forest." And just like that, the world started turning again, but the man knew. Before he let it turn too fast, he still had to finish what he started. The wind that night didn't just rattle the windows. It whispered warnings through the beams of the old cabin. Shadows clung to the corners like memories, too heavy to move. The man sat still, Kai pressed against his chest beneath a worn flannel blanket. Outside, a ranger's truck had just rolled down the hill, its headlights fading into the trees, but their meaning stayed behind like a ghost. "You seen anything like that?" Dean had asked. His voice had been casual, but his eyes searched too deep. "Young male bobcat, real small, locals are worried." The man had shaken his head, a slow and silent denial. But his heart had betrayed him, because deep in that house, not even 10 feet from where Dean stood, lay the truth. A fragile bobcat kitten, once dying on a snow-covered porch, now curled in the arms of a man who had lost everything but his silence. Jet had sensed it, tension stiff along his back, standing guard at the door. Molly refused to leave Kai's side, the mother in her awakened by something wild and ancient. As the fire crackled and the ranger's taillights disappeared, the man whispered, "They know, or they will soon." Kai blinked slowly, the way only animals do when they sense fear but choose trust. "You're not staying," the man whispered, the words cracking in his throat like frozen branches. "I promised, but not yet. Not like this." And in that moment, with a kitten curled into his grief, 2 dogs bound by loyalty, and the air thick with truth unspoken, he realized something far more terrifying than being found out. He wasn't alone anymore, and that frightened him more than any ranger ever could. The wilderness may wound us, but in the arms of the broken, even wild hearts may find warmth. That night, sleep never touched his eyes. He sat motionless in the firelight, holding Kai as though the warmth from the kitten's body might hold back time itself. But the wind outside told another story, one of consequences, of eyes watching through the pines. The ranger would come back. They always did. And the man knew what would follow. Cages, needles, euthanasia under the name of protection. He had seen it before. How the world handled wild things that got too close. By morning, the decision had formed like frost on glass. Quiet but uncheckable. No goodbyes, no announcements. He simply moved. A crate was prepared with the tenderness one might give to a cradle. Food, formula, a flannel towel that had once belonged to her. The woman he had buried under that same ridge. The man gently placed Kai inside, the kitten's golden eyes, watching him without fear. "You're stronger now," he said, his voice more to himself than the animal. "Strong enough," Jet whimpered as he zipped his coat. Molly wouldn't move from the crate side. He knelt beside her, pressed a trembling hand to her fur. "He's not ours. You know that better than I do." The door opened to a snowfall. So soft it looked like silence in motion. The forest waited. Not judging, just holding its breath. He climbed the ridge, past the pine that had split in last spring's storm, past the fire road no one used anymore. There, beneath the arms of spruce trees, he found the hollow, dry, warm, safe. He set the crate down, opened it, and Kai didn't bolt. He stepped out with quiet dignity, his paws touching snow like he belonged there all along. He turned. Once, those amber eyes locking with the man's, then he disappeared, not with fear, but with purpose. To love something wild is to accept the ache of setting it free, not for its sake, but for the sake of what it was meant to be. The silence returned like a ghost wearing its old coat. For 3 days, the man moved through his house like a shadow of himself. The crate remained in the corner, flannel towel still folded, but no weight pressing into its folds. He kept the fire going, but its warmth never reached him. He poured water into the small dish by habit, not hope. He watched the trail each morning, pretending not to, telling himself he wasn't. Jet grew restless, pacing like a soul who had lost half his purpose. Molly stayed still, her grief quieter, deeper. The house felt hollow again, not empty, just echoing with what once was. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? Set Kai free. Let nature reclaim what pain had stolen, but still, the wind outside spoke in riddles. And still, each morning, his eyes drifted to the ridge, waiting for a miracle he no longer believed in. On the 3rd day, Jet snapped. No bark, no warning. Just gone, tearing through the snow with a fury the man hadn't seen since the night she died. Jet, he called, voice raw, boots heavy in the deepening snow. But the dog didn't stop. Wouldn't stop. For 2 hours, the man searched. Every tree a stranger, every shadow familiar and unfamiliar all at once. And then, just past the old spruce, he saw them, Jet, standing tall. And beside him, almost hidden in the powdery snow, was Kai, taller now, sure, but it was him. The same eyes, the same spirit. Sometimes what you release into the wild returns not because it must, but because it chooses to, and in that choice, love is reborn. The man dropped to his knees. His body shook, not from cold, but from the sudden weight of the impossible. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Jet didn't move, just looked from the kitten to his human as if waiting for them to understand one another. Kai stepped forward, not with fear, not with desperation, but with trust, with choice. Then, like a whisper in reverse, he turned and padded past the man, heading down the trail, back home. Jet followed, and then after a long breath, so, did the man? At the cabin, the door creaked open, snow melting at their feet. And Kai walked in like he'd never left. He didn't hide, didn't hesitate. He crossed the floor slowly, paused near the fire, and looked at the man as if waiting for permission, or perhaps offering it. Jet shook off the snow and curled up beside him with a sigh of contentment, and Molly, she lifted her head, stared at the little wild thing who had once slept against her belly. No growl, no fear, just a quiet acceptance born of memory and instinct. Kai walked straight to her and lay down, his side pressed gently against hers. The man didn't move, couldn't speak. The fire crackled softly. Snow fell outside like a benediction. And in that moment, the house no longer felt hollow. The silence had changed, not absence, but peace. There is a grace in wild things choosing to stay, not because they were tamed, but because they were trusted. Molly didn't move. The old Labrador's breath was slow, her body stiff from the years, yet her eyes, glazed with age, flickered. With something ancient and wise, the quiet knowledge of pain, of waiting, of letting go. And maybe of receiving back what once was thought lost. The snow whispered against the cabin walls, wind curling around the windows like a soft breath from the forest itself. And in that hush, the smallest sound, paws on wood. Kai stepped forward. The bobcat, still frail, fur matted and thin from the battle he had fought against death, sniffed the air as if every scent held memory. His eyes were gold firelight and midnight sorrow. He moved without fear, without pause, and in one fluid moment, curled into Molly's flank like a leaf finding its place in the river's current. He rested his head gently on her outstretched paws, breathing in rhythm with her heart. The man blinked hard, turned away. A sob almost rose, but he swallowed it like so many others buried in the silence of this place. That night he didn't lock Kai in the crate. He didn't try to keep her hold. He simply folded an extra blanket by the fire, thick, soft, an open invitation, not a prison. He sat back and watched Kai walk to it. Watched Jet, his youngest dog, curl nearby, protective but calm. Watched Molly shift her tired body. Just enough to remain close. No one spoke. There was no need. Only the crackle of flames, the slow breath of beasts once broken, and the sound of something ancient returning, the sound of home. The wild and the weary shall lie down together, and the breath of healing will fill what grief emptied. Later, when the fire had burned low and his eyes felt heavy from all he'd seen and buried, the man brought out food, nothing fancy, just softened meat, a warmed bit of formula. He set the bowl beside the blanket and stepped back, hands trembling. Kai lifted his head. He didn't beg, he didn't flinch. He simply looked at the man, present, still, unafraid. The man exhaled, sank into his chair, not too close, not too far. The weight of the past days, of lost people, of lost animals, of the endless ache of waiting for something to return, dropped onto his shoulders like wet snow. "You came back," he whispered into the fire. His voice cracked, brittle with emotion. "Guess I should have known." The flames answered with soft pops, sparks flitting like spirits into the chimney sky. Outside, snow fell again, quietly, like the forest was tucking them in. "You'll leave again," he said, voice barely above the hush. When it's time, Kai didn't move. The man's eyes stayed on him, memorizing every mark, every line of fur, every wound half-healed. "I'll be ready." It was a lie, maybe. But sometimes the soul needs lies to keep breathing. Before sleep took him, he glanced down one last time. There, beneath the chair, between Molly's aging ribs and Jet's long limbs, Kai slept. 3 creatures curled into one form, one shape. That night, for the first time in what felt like years, the house didn't groan with emptiness. It breathed, it pulsed. It felt full. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds, even those who walk on pause. The man never tried to keep him, that was the difference. Love, real love, doesn't bind. After that night, Kai didn't stay. Mornings came quiet, the blanket by the fire undisturbed, the food untouched. No soft paw steps across the planks, no whisper of whiskers or flash of golden eyes at dawn. But the man didn't panic this time. He didn't pace or call. Instead, he opened the back door gently, coffee in hand, breath turning to mist, and looked out across the snow-drenched trees. Some days there was only wind, other days a silhouette on the ridge, a flicker of movement just beyond the clearing. And on rare mornings, 2 glowing eyes catching the sunlight through the pines, watching, remembering. And then, gone. Kai was out there, not lost, not abandoned, just wild. Just free, but never far. Jet would sometimes stop mid-run, frozen, nose to the wind, tail high. Molly, old as the trees, would lift her ears and stare toward the woods, as if listening to a whisper only the wild could hear. The man saw it too. Those brief flickers of return, not to stay but to remind. The bobcat was growing, surviving, living. The wind blows where it wills. And though you do not know where it comes from or where it goes, you feel its presence, as with all things wild and holy. The dogs changed after that. Jet, once jittery and unsure, began to settle. He walked beside the man now, not ahead. His body calm, his eyes steady. Molly aged like the hills, slowly, with dignity. Her steps shortened, but her gaze sharpened. Something in them had shifted. They no longer merely existed inside 4 walls. They belonged to something bigger, a rhythm of the woods, an unspoken pulse that tied dog, man, and forest together. And the man, he changed too. He began walking farther again, past the ridge, down to the old creek where the deer passed, and the fox tracks ran thin beneath the trees. Sometimes he left bits of food there, not near the cabin, far, tucked in roots or beneath overhangs the snow couldn't reach, not to lure, not to bind, just in case. Once, just once, he found prints in the snow there, fresh, clear, confident, a bobcat's walk, not a stagger. He knelt and stared at them for a long time, longer than he meant to. The prints felt like an answer. like a letter from something wild and sacred, like faith returned. Even the footprints of the wild declare glory, and in the silent snow, we read their gospel. At night, the house was still, but not empty, not anymore. The silence no longer pressed against him like a wall. It wasn't hiding anything now. It was a space. A welcome. A breath between comings and goings. A rhythm that honored what returned and what would leave again. He had never meant to care. Never meant to let the wild slip into the soft places of his heart. But sometimes when something wild chooses to trust you, not forever, but for a moment, it changes everything. And even if it leaves, the part of you it awakened never sleeps again. The man didn't cry anymore. But sometimes, in the quietest hour of the night, he would whisper, "Thank you." Not to God, not to the Bobcat, just to the world. To the pain that taught him, to the love that found him, to the silence that healed him. To love the wild is to let it go, and to know it will always return. In paw prints, in memory, in the rhythm of your own soul. Every story on Hope and Fur is more than just a tale. It's a lifeline, a heartbeat, a chance to believe again in the bond between humans and the wild. By watching and sharing stories like Kai's, you're not just spreading kindness, you're helping build a world where compassion meets conservation. Rescue isn't just saving an animal, it's saving a piece of ourselves. Support nonprofits that give animals like Kai a second chance. Join us. Let every story become a voice, and every voice become hope.